Hey there, folks. I want to cover a case that I made a video on some years ago, but I think it needs a deeper dive. And the case I am referring to is that of Dale Stehling in Mesa Verde National Park. For reasons that I'll get into later, I find this case to be rather odd. Certain aspects of it make little sense. And that could be because there is scant information out there about this incident, but even that is rather strange because this is a closed case. From the outset, this case should already be categorized as a bit unusual because people rarely go missing in Mesa Verde without being found, or at least without being found for a really long time. And there are some very obvious reasons for that. Don't get me wrong, people do occasionally go missing there, and by occasionally I mean like once every 10 years, as evidenced by the disappearance of a man named Thomas Irwin earlier this year in January of 2024. But compared to some other national parks, Mesa Verde is quite safe. So while there really is very few disappearances in the park, there is something that stood out to me surrounding the facts of each case that just kind of raises some alarm bells. Maybe it will for you as well once we get into all the details. But before we do, let's go over a brief description of this piece of land known as Mesa Verde National Park. Mesa Verde, Spanish for Green Table, was established in 1906 and contains over 52,000 acres of land. The name really makes sense when you go there, as the area is a long range of ridges, plateaus, and canyons full of greenery with winding roads that take you to points of interest within the park. What really sets this park apart from others are the extraordinary ancestral Puebloan cliff dwellings that exist within its boundaries. While many of these cliff dwellings can only be seen from the road or a nearby ridge, there are still plenty of opportunities to get up close to these incredible buildings. They range in age from about 800 years old to others that are far older than that. The ancient Puebloan people occupied a huge area of land in the Four Corners, but some of the most impressive cliff dwellings that exist today are preserved in Mesa Verde. Some of these highlights include the Spruce Tree House, the Cliff Palace, and the Balcony House. With the proper reservation, visitors can actually climb down and get an up-close tour of these structures. If you go and visit Mesa Verde, you can really get a feel for how ingenious the ancient Puebloan people were, not only with their architecture but also their agriculture and water control systems like building their own reservoirs. It's incredible to see how they developed to survive in such an environment. There are probably many reasons that these people built their homes on a cliff. Defense would be a key one, and I can tell you based on personal experience that on a 100-degree day, walking into one of these cliff dwellings felt like someone turned on the air conditioning because it was so cool. There has always been a lot of wild speculation about what happened to the Puebloan civilization and that perhaps they simply vanished off the face of the earth. In reality, many things likely contributed to the abandonment of the cliff dwellings, including warfare with other tribes like the Navajo, who referred to the Puebloans as the Anasazi, or ancient enemy. Prolonged periods of drought also must have been a contributing factor, as well as numerous others. There really is no reason to think that anything supernatural was involved in the abandonment of these dwellings. Anyway, the park itself is set up in such a way that there are two roads that each take you to a different mesa. There is the Wetherill Mesa and the Chapin Mesa. Each mesa has its own selection of ancient structures, hiking trails, museums, and gift shops. The north end of the park contains a number of hotels and lodging areas, restaurants, and also a very nice campground. As far as national parks go, Mesa Verde actually has some very good infrastructure. It's a bit of a drive to visit some of the most popular sites, but nothing close to the scale of a place like Yosemite or Yellowstone. There's also not a whole lot of hiking options compared to other parks. There are very few trails, and most of them are relatively short. This likely contributes to the lack of disappearances in the park. While there are very few hiking options, the ones that exist could be dangerous in certain ways. Some crawl along steep canyon walls, which is an obvious fall danger. Mesa Verde can also get quite hot, which creates its own hazards. Overall, though, Mesa Verde is a wonderful park and one of my personal favorites. Hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea of what we're dealing with when it comes to people going missing here. A lot of roads and infrastructure with few hiking trails makes it relatively safe, but things can happen. What we need to analyze is how or why it is happening. So let's get into the story of Dale Stehling. But real quick, I want to give a big thank you to Surfshark VPN for supporting this channel and giving me the ability to go on location as I do in this video. Now, a VPN is a virtual private network, and it encrypts all the data sent between your computer and the internet so that no one can steal your personal and private information, which is often sold to third parties for nefarious purposes. For people like me, if I leave my home state and travel somewhere like Colorado as I do in this video, I'll typically be using a lot of public Wi-Fi along the way, whether that be at hotels, coffee shops, or anywhere else. These places can really leave you exposed to hackers, and one way to protect yourself from these kinds of attacks is by using Surfshark. But Surfshark goes far beyond just protecting your data. It can give you access to more content on streaming websites with the simple click of a button. All you have to do is change your virtual location to somewhere else in the world and see what new or interesting content is offered there. Using a VPN can be immensely helpful to pretty much everyone, and as someone who has had their bank information stolen within the last year, I can't help but feel that I should have been a bit more proactive in getting myself a little internet protection. So act now and get an extra 4 months of Surfshark completely free by clicking the link in the description and using coupon code MISSINGENIGMA, or simply visit surfshark.com/missingenigma. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee, and if you have yet to try out a VPN, getting 4 extra months is pretty hard to beat. Mitchell Dale Stehling was 51 years old in June of 2013. He lived in Goliad, Texas with his wife Deneen, who worked as a pediatric nurse. Dale worked for many years as a meat cutter and market manager for various stores before retiring. The couple had been married for 32 years, and during that time they had raised 4 children together, 2 daughters and 2 sons. Dale was described as an avid outdoorsman who spent much of the family's free time taking them on camping trips. Dale was still a fit man at 6 feet tall and 230 pounds. He often went on long walks by himself. In 2013, Dale, along with his wife, mother, and father, planned to do a bit of a road trip vacation together, traveling across multiple states in an RV. By June 9th of 2013, Dale, Deneen, and Dale's parents were already on day 4 of their long-awaited vacation. They had already visited the Canyon de Chelly National Monument in Arizona, but it was when they entered New Mexico that the RV started having troubles, and so they were forced to stop and get it serviced. This must have happened close to Mesa Verde because the 4 decided that they should take a day trip to the national park while their motorhome was being worked on. They entered Mesa Verde later in the afternoon on June 9th and resigned themselves to just driving around in the park rather than engaging in a hike in the middle of the hot summer day. But while there, Dale saw the spruce treehouse from a distance, one of the most iconic cliff dwellings at Mesa Verde. Immediately captivated, Dale made the decision to head in that direction on a short quarter-mile hike that takes parkgoers to the dwelling. This decision, in most instances, would be no big deal. The parking lot that the group had pulled into is right next to a ranger station and gift shop. From atop the mesa, one can actually see the spruce treehouse quite well, but trees and brush can obscure hikers as they walk down. Overall, this is an easy hike, and the vast majority of people are totally capable of it. This is going to be one of those rare cases where we actually have a number of photos of the events leading up to the disappearance. This photo of Dale and Deneen was taken in the park that very day. Deneen recalled that Dale was a bit bored around this time and wanted to go do something, but he was the only one interested in walking down to check out the treehouse. Before he left, Deneen told him that she would go and get him some water to take on the short walk. Dale rebuffed her offer, saying that he did not need it as the spruce treehouse was just right there, meaning within eyesight. So Dale Stehling began walking down the path away from his family. Right before disappearing behind a bend in the trail, Deneen called to him and asked him to turn around for a picture. Dale, perhaps not hearing her, simply called back, "I'll see you in a bit," and vanished behind one of the switchbacks. The time was estimated to be around 4:15 p.m. that Dale was last seen at the top of the trail. Temperatures in the canyon were reported to reach around 100 degrees that day. Just to be fully clear, the hike that Dale intended to do probably should have only taken him 10 minutes to get there. Then you get to be up close and check out the cliff dwelling, and then you head back up. You could probably safely say that he should have only been gone maybe half an hour tops. It's a very short loop trail that nobody should get lost on. But in this situation, hours passed and Dale did not come back up the trail. Dale's mother, who was atop the trailhead with her husband and Deneen, began to get really worried that something bad had happened. The three of them had seen many people head down to the spruce treehouse and return as time passed. Deneen decided to go and talk with the park rangers as it became more and more apparent that something was wrong. They told Deneen to wait a while longer, but as hours passed, there was still no Dale. Some rangers began to search around 7:20 p.m. that night, but stopped as it began to get too dark to see. Soon, it became time for the park to close, and Dale was still out there somewhere. The next morning would mark the true beginning of the search as Dale Stehling was declared missing. Searchers knew where Dale intended to go, but the area is so small that they knew it was unlikely that he got lost on the short spruce treehouse trail. They quickly discovered that Dale either took a wrong turn or intentionally decided to walk the petroglyph trail. The petroglyph trail is another loop trail, though quite a bit longer than the one to the spruce treehouse at about 2.4 miles. The first half of the trail follows a canyon wall before coming to the petroglyph panel that the trail was named after. Beyond that, the trail climbs up and returns back to the spruce treehouse area. Obviously, this trail is quite a bit longer, but in the summer, it is also a trail that you should bring some water on in order to be especially safe. Recall that Dale was walking with no supplies at all. The reason that we know Dale was on this trail is because a retired judge named Jess Vigil was also hiking the trail that day along with his 2 daughters and a friend. Jess actually encountered Dale multiple times while on the hike. At the time, Jess thought nothing of the encounter. It wasn't until he saw Dale's disappearance on the news that he realized he was likely the last person to see Dale before he disappeared. Looking back at the photographs they all took that day, they realized that they had actually captured a picture of Dale standing next to Jess on the petroglyph trail. Jess says that he first encountered Dale on the trail around 5 p.m. when they stopped together to catch their breath. Jess recalled Dale saying something to the tune of, "I'd guess I better hurry as I got some people waiting for me." They saw Dale once again as they approached the petroglyph panel 20 minutes later. Dale was nearby, sitting on a boulder. As Jess and his family approached to view the petroglyphs, Dale got up and stated he should be on his way before heading further up the trail. Jess recalled that Dale seemed perfectly relaxed and nothing seemed wrong. After this, Dale walked off into oblivion and Jess was left with the cryptic feeling that he was the last one to see this man who vanished into thin air. Despite knowing that Dale hiked the petroglyph trail and also knowing that he made it as far as the petroglyphs themselves, the search found little success. Details on the search are fairly hard to come by, but it seems at its peak there was 60 to 70 searchers on the ground, with 2 dog teams, helicopter surveillance, and even teams that used ropes to rappel down the cliffs of Chapin Mesa. Scent dogs initially showed interest in the trail, as you would expect they might, but this only lasted for the first few days of the search. Realistically, there are very few places one could disappear while on this trail. It's on a cliffside, so you can't really just walk off, but if you do, you're going to fall. So the most reasonable explanation was, and perhaps always has been, that Dale fell from the petroglyph trail. Yet no clue was found from searching this rather limited area within which he was last seen. It might be worth noting that on the morning of the first full day of the search, June 10th, rangers were reportedly able to get a partial ping from Dale's cell phone. It's also stated that around 7 p.m. that day, that his phone attempted to make a call to its voicemail. After that, All calls would go directly to his voicemail and there was no other GPS pings. It's possible that whatever happened to Dale, he was still alive by the evening the following day based on this information. Overall, not much to go on. Mesa Verde Chief Ranger Jesse Farias stated that the area had been heavily searched and there was simply no results. The public information officer for the park, Betty Lawrence, said that typically when people get lost in the park, we find them, or they resurface within a couple of hours. She said that this was the first time in her tenure that someone had been missing for longer than that. More evidence that Mesa Verde is really not a place where people disappear. After a few weeks, the search for Dale ended. The following November, they had a fresh dog team come in, likely a cadaver dog, and search the entire area again, but the dog never hit on anything. As time went on, Mesa Verde National Park would use the location for search and rescue training and exercises, so in reality, multiple searches took place in this area over time, but none of them provided any insight into what happened to Dale. Chief Ranger Jesse Farias stated, "My gut feeling is that he is out there somewhere and never left the park. There is no reason to think otherwise. There have been no sightings. The case is still open." The search was scaled back after only a few days, partly because personnel and equipment had to go and fight wildfires occurring that summer, and partly because temperatures in the area were consistently over 100 degrees that week, and Dale had no water. The odds of them ever finding him alive beyond a few days were very slim. There is, however, an incident that often gets overlooked when it comes to this case. Let me explain. On June 25th of 2013, an article appeared in the High Country News written by a woman named Jody Peterson. Jody visited Mesa Verde the day after Dale disappeared, and like Dale, she decided to hike the Petroglyph Trail. She was aware that there was a missing man at Mesa Verde, but as you can imagine, early the next day the only information that had gotten out was that a man had disappeared while walking to the Spruce Treehouse. In the article, Jody describes hiking the Petroglyph Trail, and she details how steep and rugged it is, squeezing through tall rocks and descending rough-cut stone stairways. She states that after an hour of walking, she suddenly heard a weary male voice call out saying, "I need some help." She thought of the missing hiker she'd heard about, and wondered if he instead attempted to hike the Petroglyph Trail. She called out to the disembodied voice several times, but never got a response. She considered scrambling down the cliffside, but worried she would wind up in a similar position, lost and desperate for help. Looking at her cell phone, she realized, as everyone else does who walks into the canyon, that there is no cell signal. Instead, she hiked back down the trail as fast as she could until she returned to the trailhead with its ranger station. She found the chief ranger and told him what she had heard. She says that she saw relief wash over his face as he said, "We thought we heard a call for help in that area yesterday." He then talked about bringing in more dogs and searchers. Jody left the ranger station and looked across the valley to the canyon she had just been on. She then said a silent prayer to herself that Dale be found safe. Jody made it back home the next day, and she fully believed that she'd read about a missing hiker being found. Instead, she learned that Dale was still missing, and there were some 70 people looking for him. By the time Jody got around to writing the article, the search had been scaled down, with it being unlikely that Dale could be found alive. She speculates that perhaps Dale fell between some big rocks in a place where searchers just couldn't see him. Jody's story is really the final clue in the case of Dale's disappearance. She does say that there is no way she can be certain that the man she heard was Dale, but given her description, it certainly seems likely. Walking down the Petroglyph Trail for an hour would put you very near to the location where Dale was last seen. Her story, if accurate, would indicate that Dale fell down the cliffside and survived, which could be the explanation for why he wasn't found by searchers if he was still mobile and tried to walk himself out of the situation. But this is really the extent of the information I've discovered on the disappearance and search. So let's fast forward 7 years to 2020. In September of 2020, it was widely reported that human remains were discovered in Mesa Verde, and that they likely belonged to Dale Stehling. They were able to make this determination without any initial testing because the skeletal remains were found with Dale's driver's license, credit cards, and social security card. Officials said that the remains were found 4.2 miles from the point where Dale was last seen, and apparently at the bottom of a canyon. This area had supposedly been searched back in 2013 when Dale initially went missing, but we are given no details about whether it was an area that was covered by a helicopter, with ground searchers, or with search dogs. They add that there is no indication of foul play, and that he was believed to have died from natural causes. They were uncertain if a DNA test to confirm the remains would be possible, as they state that some moisture must be retained in the bones to take a sample, and most of the bones discovered had been bleached by the hot sun. There were no additional details about the type of terrain he was found in or anything else. The remains were only found because an anonymous caller pointed searchers to the correct location. This anonymous individual was hiking somewhere off-trail in an area closed to the public, which may be the reason they chose to remain anonymous, but I can't help but feel weirded out by this. Like, who's doing this? Mesa Verde is mostly desert and rock, with steep canyons and ridges. To go off-trail means you're going to be doing some crazy tough hiking in dangerous terrain. You have to worry about dehydration and rattlesnakes, and why do it? Were they trying to find some off-limits cliff dwellings to look at? Possibly, but there has to be some reason that someone would go this far out of bounds, and then what are the odds to come across these skeletal remains? Those odds are probably astronomical. This aspect of the discovery is really unusual. It's not something you're going to see very often. Now, let's talk about the location that was given for Dale's remains, because it's so embarrassingly vague that it does nothing but beg new questions. All we know is that they were in a canyon, which tells us next to nothing given the terrain here, and that they were west of Durango, in a remote section of the park. Durango is a small city that is so far east of Mesa Verde that it is basically a joke that they would use it as some sort of general marker. The entire park is west of Durango. West of Durango is the kind of thing you would say if you didn't want to say anything at all. It's basically meaningless. Still, I have to assume that this means the remains were found somewhere east or northeast of the Petroglyph Trail. And make no mistake, 4.2 miles as the crow flies means that Dale must have walked an incredible distance from the area where he was last seen. This especially applies to Mesa Verde because the area is nothing but canyons and ridges. It's virtually impossible to walk in a straight line. And to me, this area makes the most sense because the eastern half of the park pretty much has nothing in it in terms of trails or roads or anything for visitors. It's all just wild country and best fits the description given by the MPS as a remote location. But again, this is just going to raise more questions. The park spokeswoman told the Durango Herald that, due to the fact that the remains were found in a closed area, by someone hiking off-trail in a closed area, and because of the cultural sensitivity of the park and its resources, and to prevent others from also hiking off-trail, causing resource damage and potentially turning into additional search and rescue cases, the park will not be releasing the exact location name. I'll let you think and decide if that reasoning makes any sense at all. For me, that statement makes no sense. Who's going to be encouraged to head off-trail after hearing about a guy who died while wandering off-trail? The people who do this kind of thing already do it. These types of statements are what leads to people creating some crazy theories about the place. And even I'm starting to think there's something to this because they're really making an effort to cover this thing up for some reason. At the very least, they could have named the canyon that Dale was found in. Doing so would be specific enough to tell us what route he might have taken, and vague enough that it would not give away the location of any protected ruins. Instead, the Park Service decided to say nothing at all. One article released at the time that Dale's remains were discovered quotes his wife Deneen calling him directionally challenged, something I had not heard mentioned about him before. Not that you would think it would matter very much on a pretty clear-cut trail, but Either way, it seems she was more referring to how Dale ended up on the petroglyph trail to begin with. You'd think it would be a pretty hard thing to do given how close the spruce treehouse was, but I suppose it's possible he made that wrong turn and just kept going. Though at some point you would think he would have realized that this is not the right way. The alternative is that Dale simply decided to walk to the petroglyph panel without telling anyone. Neither scenarios really have any effect on the ultimate outcome. The article goes on to mention that it wouldn't be hard for someone to go off trail and wander into the backcountry, a statement that I have to disagree with for reasons I'll present later. As you can imagine, I petitioned Mesa Verde for records regarding Dale's case, and over 3 years later, nothing. On a case that's closed. They won't even respond to my emails anymore. This is the only time that this has happened to me while dealing with the NPS, and I kind of find it a bit troubling. This is essentially the totality of information that we have on the disappearance and death of Dale Stehling. All that we have left to do is speculate about how this could have happened. But after initially looking at this case, I couldn't think of what the answer must have been. Did Dale fall down the cliffside and then walk a ridiculous amount of miles south, and then east, and then north, to get to the point where he was found? Theories are a bit hard to come by on this one. If anyone's ever seen the History Channel movie Vanished with David Paulides, you might have seen this case come up on there. In it, they make claims that we have no idea why the native Puebloan people abandoned the cliff dwellings, kind of giving off a hint that there could be some supernatural explanation for it. I mean, this is the History Channel, so obviously it was aliens. And then the show goes on to postulate that Dale got sucked into some portal or vortex, and they bring a guy on there and do some time dilation experiment to show that there's apparently time dilation in Mesa Verde. Well, the portal thing seems to fall apart since they ended up finding his body, unless of course the portal just transported him to another area of the park. But then again, it seemed like he was heard calling for help near the area he disappeared, so portals, maybe not so much. In the end, I knew I needed to go and visit this area and get out on this trail to better understand what was happening here. Upon entering Mesa Verde, you start traveling along winding roads that take you from canyon to canyon. Elevation in Mesa Verde can obviously vary depending on where you are, but mostly resides at the 7,000 to 8,500 feet area. The mesa towers over the rest of the countryside, supplying some very good viewpoints. The steep walls that the road runs along are prone to rockfall, but overall the pavement is in pretty good condition compared to some other national parks. When I was here in the summer of 2024, the only mesa that was open was the Chapin Mesa. The Weatherill Mesa was closed due to construction. This removes a large chunk of viewable park, but luckily, the only area of interest on this trip resided in the Chapin Mesa. So I began taking the road south towards the Spruce Treehouse. The first stop after parking was the Spruce Tree Terrace. This area contains a museum, cafe, gift shop, ranger station, etc. It was the place where Deneen and Dale's parents waited for hours while he was hiking the petroglyph trail. It's a busy location with many people trying to get a look at the Spruce Treehouse, which is currently closed to up-close viewing. Being up in this area, you can see why Dale would be unconcerned about taking any water or supplies with him. The treehouse is readily apparent from the terrace, and it doesn't feel like it would be a distance of any concern. And really, it's not. We'll simply never know what caused Dale to make the turn onto the petroglyph trail. From this point, you can either enjoy the distant view of the spruce treehouse or try and hike one of the two trails in the area. The petroglyph trail was very busy while I was there. Generally, I try not to capture other park goers in my videos if I can help it, but there was nearly always someone behind or in front of me. Of course, summer is one of the busiest times of the year. A series of paved switchbacks take you down from the terrace, then you encounter the clearly labeled trail to the spruce treehouse, which as you can see is closed. Moving further along, you encounter a sign with an arrow pointing towards the petroglyph trail. I try to imagine if the treehouse was open, how easy it would be to take a wrong turn here and just start walking down the petroglyph. But what I always come back to is this. The petroglyph starts taking you away from the obvious spruce treehouse. Wouldn't someone notice that they were no longer heading towards their intended destination? In the end, it probably doesn't matter why Dale ended up on the petroglyph trail. What matters is what happened while he was on it. One thing that I wanted to do while hiking this trail was to take minimal supplies. Of course, I carried my GPS and personal locator beacon, but other than that, I just carried a large bottle of water. I was curious how many ounces I would need to complete the trail. This might give me some idea about whether or not dehydration was ever a factor while Dale was doing the hike. Pretty much as soon as you start down the petroglyph trail, there is no more pavement. The trail becomes rocks and dirt. You take more switchbacks down towards the bottom of the canyon and eventually encounter an area where the trail splits again. You can either take the petroglyph trail or the Spruce Canyon trail, which loops back up and around the terrace. But we all know what trail we are here for. So I'm currently walking on the petroglyph trail. I just made the turn off from the where the spruce treehouse is. It's closed. Back in 2013 it wasn't, so you could actually go there. Since 2015, you can't. Kind of makes it easy to follow the trail at that point, but still, it was clearly marked. There was clear markings for the spruce treehouse. There was clear markings for the petroglyph. So as I follow this up, the question is going to be, how could Dale Stehling have got off trail? Could it happen? We'll find out, and you'll get to see what much of the trail looks like. It's a little bit rugged. It's not paved like some of the other trails around here. And it goes up pretty high, maybe around 8,000 feet. So we'll see where it takes us and get some good footage. So the trail is rugged, but it's quite clear, and so far there's really no good way off of it. It is a steep edge leading down into a canyon. It's not really a place you could just wander off trail, more likely a place you would fall off the trail, and then it would be difficult to get back up, which is kind of so far the way I'm leaning on this. I think this outcropping behind me is actually where the only photograph that was taken of Dale on the trail was taken. It kind of looks like it. I can't be positive, but he was kind of captured in the edge of a photo of a judge and his family who were also walking the trail. It was the last time he was captured on camera. He was kind of leapfrogging the judge and his family. He would get ahead of them and they would get ahead of him, and eventually they just stopped seeing him. But when they developed their photos, he was captured, and I think he was captured just under the edge of this outcropping. So we know he made it this far and even further, but believe this might be the last point where he was seen. There's a lot of big rocks on the trail, which makes it difficult to walk around. My thinking is that it would be easy to trip and maybe fall down this ledge here. There was a hiker who reportedly heard calls for help at some point. It was never verified, but if he fell and couldn't get back up, you would think maybe he was yelling for help, and someone heard that, but they sent out a search party and they didn't find anything or hear anything, so it's kind of unverified, but it was on this trail, so, and Dale was missing, so I don't know why someone would make that up, but all indications are he might have fallen. But then did he hurt himself? Obviously not, because he was found much further away. So let's keep moving. Well, I'm going to say scratch my previous comments about where that last picture might have been taken, because there's a lot of outcroppings and rock overhangs that kind of all look the same. So somewhere on this trail, he was photographed, and it was the last photograph. And it's kind of difficult to really judge. There's kind of a trail up there. Couldn't really tell where it was going. It seems like they marked the correct trail with yellow ribbons. Might be easy to get off trail, but then again, I mean, if you're not on the trail, you're sliding up and down the cliffside, so it should be fairly obvious. So yeah, the trail is definitely not clearly defined in many ways, but at the same time, with a little intuition, you can kind of tell where it is. Now, Dale's wife said he had some directional problems. That's not necessarily a good sign on a trail like this. Though she said he was also a good walker and could walk for miles, so maybe also not a good thing if you're lost, actually. Who knows?
One thing I noticed is that there was often ample shade on the trail when I was there, though this would probably change depending on the time of day. If you were stuck in the sun for the majority of the time, this trail could probably get pretty brutal because it gets very hot in that canyon. Some rock overhangs are also so large that I imagine they would provide shade throughout most of the day. There's a number of places on the trail that there is plenty of room to stop and take a break. There's also quite a few spots that appear to be Puebloan ruins. Very little is left of them today. This would make sense as the petroglyph trail is based on an old trail used by the Puebloans to move around the canyon. I was fortunate enough to see some wildlife on this trail when I encountered what appeared to be a pretty good-sized bull snake.
So I'm on the trail kind of early in the morning. It's like 10. When Dale went out on the trail, it was 4:30-ish, maybe 5. So the sun was in a completely different area of the sky. For me, I'm mostly in shade under these rock faces the whole time. For him, the sun might have just been hitting this area, making it really hot. That's an issue because he didn't take any water. And Mesa Verde can get very hot. As you can see, I'm not wearing my usually required plaid shirt. Just not good weather to be doing it in. So, and I brought water. You know, initially it was probably okay because he thought he was just going to the spruce tree house. Really short hike. Probably didn't need to take water for that. But for some reason he changed course, maybe got lost, took a wrong turn, whatever it was, and he went down the petroglyph trail, 2.4 miles, a loop, elevation changes, really rocky, not paved. Kind of dangerous because you're on a ledge the whole time. So it set things up for a bit of a disaster, even though it's not a terribly long hike and he was a good walker, but he wasn't prepared for the worst, and the worst happened. So again, I'm seeing so many areas where one could potentially fall, and if you fell here, you're not getting back up to the trail. That's a huge problem because you got two choices. You can stay put and call for help, or you can try to walk your way out of there. But the only way you're walking your way out of there is if you just follow the canyon down to its natural end or to an area where you can actually climb out. Dale must have tried to do that because he was found so far away. But then again, we're going to have to discuss where he was found because that doesn't make any sense either, really. But I haven't got to the petroglyphs yet, and that was apparently the last place he was seen. So I want to at least get there before I make any further judgments about what could have happened on the trail that got him off trail.
If I haven't already, I also want to put a little asterisk by most of the things I say in this video as it relates to the facts of this case, because we have very few. The National Park Service has never actually released the report, even though he was found. Kind of unusual in itself. It's been 4 years now and still nothing. We are left with minimal details on this case. Mostly just words said by his family about what happened. And so much of what happened when he was found and how that came to be is kind of questionable and a little uncertain. So I don't want to say positively that everything in this video is correct. I hope one day that I will be able to make sure that everything I've said in this video, or maybe I can amend it in a future one, is all of the true facts about this case. But the full story, as it said, has yet to come out. So just want to make a little FYI about that. Just a little update. There's definitely a lot of places you can get off track because there's a lot of funky offshoots to these trails that it's a little unclear which direction you need to go. Usually they always lead back to the main trail, but still the confusion exists.
Eventually, you come to the petroglyph panel, which really is a sight to see. My favorite hikes are always the ones that have some sort of reward at the end, whether that be a good view, a hidden mountain lake, or some ancient petroglyphs. These kinds of experiences are what makes Mesa Verde a great park.
So I just passed some of the petroglyphs, which may have been the last place that Dale was last seen. Again, he was photographed beforehand by the judge and his family. Then they kept leapfrogging each other, eventually encountering each other again and for the last time at the petroglyphs, after which he walked off and they never saw him again. So something happened to him after that. What that is, that's the question. After the petroglyphs, you sure do get some climbing too. So the question is, if you fell when you were at this point up from the petroglyphs and you survived that fall, which, I mean, you can't imagine you would fall to the bottom. There's just so much brush in the way. There's a lot of stuff that would stop a fall. Yet apparently someone heard calls for help around this area. You can see the valley floor down there. Nice kind of grassy area. If you were all the way down there, you might want to follow that all the way out because climbing the cliffs on either side seems a bit unfeasible. Still, we're gonna keep pushing and keep looking and see if there's any other obvious way that someone could get lost out here, you know, without falling and injuring themselves potentially, or just getting off track. Haven't really seen something that would explain that, but we'll keep going. So in some ways, as I keep going, it makes even less sense. If Dale got to the petroglyphs, it's just a short way to the top. And once you get to your top elevation, it's pretty much flat. And to go off trail here seems odd. I don't know how you would do it. It made more sense that there would be some sort of fall that would drop him down into the valley. But there's such a short span of trail between the petroglyphs and the top of the mesa here. Let's briefly talk about how he was found. So he's found something like 4.3 miles, more than 4 miles away from where he was last seen. And the way they talked about it in the media, I'm kind of curious if it was a quote from the Park Service or not. But they said that he was found somewhere remote in the park and west of Durango, which is a city to the east. That is kind of a weird way of saying where someone was found. I mean, normally you would base it off where he was last seen. A part of me wonders if they did that because if they actually said, well, he was found east of the Petroglyph Trail and about 4.3 miles to the east or northeast, it would have to be kind of to the northeast to still be in the park. To someone who knows the land here and knows the trails and roads, that doesn't make much sense. Because to leave the Petroglyph Trail and start heading east means you're going to start crossing the main roads that go through the park, 2 of them that are down in this area. And if Dale crossed roads, how was he not found? I mean, you can't go off trail here and not hit a road. And yet he was found to the east or northeast of here in a remote area of the park. The only way that that would be possible without hitting a road would be for him to head south, then east, and out of the park, and then north, which doesn't make much sense. And he would have had to have walked much farther than just 4 miles. So where he was found kind of doesn't make sense. And ever since 2020, when his remains were found, not much has been said about it. It came out in the media once, and then there was nothing more about it. And the park officials never really gave an exact location, just a general location. You know, still in the park and west of Durango. Very odd to say that. They should have said he was found 4.3 miles or so to the northeast of where he disappeared on the Petroglyph Trail. But again, you look at that map, he would have had to cross a road and multiple ridges and canyons. Could he really do that? I just don't know. It seems kind of odd. I mean, he didn't have water. He was a good walker, but that hike would have been incredibly strenuous. Certainly would have killed you, but could you really make it there in the first place? But then again, like I said, we don't have the report on this. I don't know exactly where he was found. The story could, in a way, be completely different. And that's kind of the troubling part about it, is that I don't have exact information. I just have what was released to the media in 2020 when his remains were found. So there is the potential that he didn't fall down the cliff on the first half of the trail and that he just walked off behind me in that direction and started heading east, ignored the fact that he crossed some roads and just kept walking. That doesn't make a lot of sense though. Another odd part about this is how his remains were found. Obviously, The searches that were done in 2013 were completely unsuccessful. And then 7 years later, an anonymous individual who is apparently wandering around in the remotest parts of the park where you're not actually supposed to be, as I understand it. No one's supposed to just be wandering around in this area, and why would you want to, frankly? But apparently someone was, and they came across his remains, just out of the blue, randomly, in a remote region of this park. And apparently they reported the find anonymously, so we don't know who found them. They just, I guess, left a message or spoke with somebody anonymously with the Park Service and said, I found some remains out in this really remote location. He gave him some details. The parks took it seriously and went out there and found Dale Stehling out in the middle of nowhere, far from where he apparently disappeared. Everything about that is kind of odd and doesn't make a lot of sense. It's kind of rare to have these stories where the body was found. We know where they disappeared. We know where the body was found, but we can't really explain how that happened, how we got from point A to point B. It would have been a tough hike in the hot sun, no water. It seems odd that he got there. And that's why, even though remains have been found, this case is still a little bit unexplained. Maybe more than a little bit, in fact. There's a lot that's weird about this, from the guy wandering anonymously out in the regions of this park and just stumbling across someone's remains. Those chances are 1,000,000 to 1. One, that someone would want to just walk out in the middle of the park somewhere, and two, that they stumbled across remains of an individual who'd been missing out here for 7 years. Very odd. Kind of makes you wonder about foul play a little bit, but how the heck would that factor into this? I mean, explain to me why someone would be out here looking to harm a middle-aged male walking on the trail. Doesn't make much sense, but that's where we are with things. Still, I'm going to continue on the second half of the trail, which should be easier than the first, flatter terrain, and see if anything makes more sense as I continue to go. So in trying to rack my brain about what could have happened here, I have kind of considered that once you get up to the top here, you are much more exposed to the sun than when you're down there along the canyon walls and you get the occasional shady respite from the rocky overhangs. Here, you're just getting straight up hit by the sun. And obviously I brought water and a GPS, so I'm not going to get lost or dehydrated. But Dale, he didn't have either of those things. So it makes me wonder if he was starting to get a little thirsty, a little tired. And sometimes people can get really disoriented when they get dehydrated in that fashion. Is it possible that caused him to lose his way? I mean, you'd really have to try, because boy, that's a pretty obvious trail. So, I might be grasping at straws with that one. I'm just not sure how you could just kind of wander off or get lost here without maybe falling off the edge on the other side of the trail. But if he did that and followed the canyon out, that would take him south, and then he would have had to go east and then north to get to the point where he was eventually found. But that mileage, that would have, I don't even want to calculate how many miles that would be. I'm sure that distance would be something like 15 miles, probably more. I'm sure that the 4.3 miles distance that was reported is just as the crow flies, and so he certainly would have had to walk more to get to that point. But could he have done it in the hot sun without water? I don't know. But still, the indications that we do have, if someone really did hear a voice calling for help while Dale was lost, that does indicate that he fell down the cliffside over there, survived, and then was able to walk at least some distance to get to the point where he was found. But obviously he didn't climb back up these canyon walls because he would have hit a road. He would have to climb around them. And that's a hell of a hike. So I'm getting towards the end of the hike here. Just want to cover a few other things I've noticed. I've drank about 32 ounces of water on this little trek. There's no phone service out here, at least not for me. Apparently Dale did have a phone, but most anywhere you go in Mesa Verde, it's not going to work unless you're at the very top or some of the high overlooks around here. You might get a bar or two, but in general, you cannot rely on phone service out here. Obviously, he didn't have any. If he did, things probably would have ended differently. I don't know what to think about this one. You know, it is a bit of a cautionary tale. Dale left on this hike thinking that it was just going to be a short little thing to the spruce tree house. You know, told his wife, "I'll see you in a few minutes." Never came back. Took a wrong turn or didn't. Maybe he wanted to do this trail. I mean, you'd think he would have noticed at some point that he was not at the spruce tree house and he was walking miles somewhere else. Again, the trails seem to be pretty well marked. Maybe they weren't in 2013. I can't really attest to that. But yeah, you know, don't take even the short walks lightly, especially when you're out here in the desert and the heat. If he was better prepared, things probably would not have turned out this way. But that doesn't change the fact that what happened to him was quite odd. It would have made more sense for him to have been found down in the canyon somewhere below the petroglyph trail and not 4 miles to the northeast of here in a remote area of the park, west of Durango, as they say. So I'll get back to you when I get to the end. All right, so my final determination, I think, is that it doesn't make sense that he would have gone off trail up at the top where the trail is relatively flat, well defined. Even if you were a bit disoriented, I mean, to just wander off, I don't know, it just doesn't make much sense. This trail is very obvious up here. So I have to go with some sort of fall theory, that he fell. And obviously that again is supported by someone hearing calls for help. But he would have had to have fallen in a very short space in terms of distance. Once you get to the petroglyphs, it's only a very short way up to the top of the mesa here, but it's a climb. I mean, part of it's you're kind of just climbing on the boulders that are here. It's not super hard though, but some people get close to the edge to get a view because it's a great view. And I do wonder if it's possible that he could have fallen at that point and been forced to go down into the valley there. At which point, somehow he's wandering around out in the remote regions of this park, I guess. You know, I'm not going to be able to explain this whole thing here. I'm not sure how he got to where he was found. Well, overall and in general, I think when I come out to these places, it's really helpful to develop a theory or get a handle on what happened here. You know, because without walking the trail and kind of being here, it's really hard to know where someone could have gone wrong. You know, what areas are people susceptible to falling, going off trail and whatnot. And again, while there are areas of confusion in the first half of the trail, they usually always link back up with the main trail, or they just kind of dead end. And the danger of just accidentally wandering off trail during that first half is minimal, because to wander off trail in any sense means you're falling. So really the only angle I can go is some sort of accidental fall. And again, in a really specific area of the trail, because we know where he was last seen. And he was last seen kind of at the very end of that first half when you're walking along the canyon walls here. So something must have happened. And hopefully one day I'll be able to get more information on this case. Hopefully make a little addendum with more answers. But I'll have to keep hounding the Park Service about it. I'm sure they're kind of tired of me, but sometimes you got to be a thorn in someone's side to get results, so I'm going to keep doing that. And yes, there's the museum or visitor center. So my hike is just about done.
Now, before we finish up and attempt to come to some sort of conclusion in this case, I need to bring up something that I briefly mentioned at the beginning of this video, and that is the disappearance of a man named Thomas Irwin, which occurred earlier this year in Mesa Verde. But can you guess where he disappeared from? The Petroglyph Trail. So, people very rarely go missing in this park, but when they do, it seems they go missing on this trail. Believe it or not, we know even less about Thomas Irwin's disappearance in many ways. He is a 73-year-old man. He is 6 feet tall, 250 pounds. Authorities found his vehicle in the park. He apparently has some sort of cognitive impairment which can cause him confusion, and he also took unspecified medication which he didn't have on him. He was last seen on January 15, 2024, while hiking on the Petroglyph Trail alone. And I have to say, this would be a really dangerous trail for a 73-year-old man who is out of shape. The climbing portion of this hike that occurs after the petroglyphs would be a serious concern. There is another little wrinkle to this story that you might find familiar, however. On January 16th, the day after Irwin disappeared, his cell phone was anonymously turned into the park's museum. Last I heard, authorities were still looking for more information about who this individual was that found Irwin's phone. I can't help but wonder myself, did this person find the phone on the trail? Were they another person who was wandering off trail and stumbled upon some evidence? Again, we have a disappearance where very little is known, and oftentimes I hate even covering ones like that. Still, there is a lot that is familiar about this incident and Dale's. Can people get lost on the Petroglyph Trail? Yes, I suppose you could, but you can't really get very far without falling off the cliffside. The only place you can really go off trail is up top on the plateau,
and once you start walking up there, you're going to hit a road. Again, we're really only left with the possibility that these guys fell or something. And sure, the weather at Mesa Verde can be extreme, but when Dale was last seen, he was reportedly fine. Dehydration didn't seem to be a problem. They said he looked relaxed and unconcerned, and he was about halfway done with his hike at that point. But that area right after the petroglyphs is dangerous and a bit confusing. One thing that is worth mentioning is that All Trails shows a short secondary trail that shoots off from the middle of the petroglyph trail and takes you toward the bottom of the canyon. When I was up there, I didn't notice it, nor did I see any signs for it. Mesa Verde certainly doesn't advertise it, as it's not on their maps that they give to visitors. Still, someone who's confused, or maybe someone who didn't look at the trail before hiking, like Dale, could possibly get confused and take this offshoot. If you didn't know you were supposed to go up at the end of the canyon, you could be forgiven for thinking that the trail just goes on. This trail is not well marked. It's possible Dale or even Thomas could have gone down this way. But then what? If the option is to walk off trail and down the canyon, or turn back, why would you choose to go off trail? Whatever happened to Dale, it seems that he couldn't get back up to the trail, as evidenced by those calls for help. He was known as the walking man to his family, so maybe he tried to walk his way out of there. But if he was found in the eastern half of the park, he would have had to walk south, then east, then north. Basically, you'd have no choice but to follow the canyons, and that would add up to one hell of a journey. But it's the only way to get to the eastern half that would avoid crossing one of the major roadways in the park. There is a part of me that wants to simplify the explanation to this case by saying maybe Dale fell into Spruce Canyon and just started walking north. To me, this would be the Occam's razor explanation. To get the requisite 4.2 miles, he would have had to walk north up Navajo Canyon or Wickup Canyon and die there. That would make a lot more sense in terms of a location where you might find a body, but then I think about what the Park Service said. The remains were found in a remote location closed off to the public. Does this location really qualify? It's a mile or less as the crow flies to the nearest main road, depending on which canyon you're in. I don't consider that very remote, and if Dale simply walked north in essentially the same canyon he fell into, then why wouldn't the park just say that? Why not say, Dale Stehling died 4.2 miles north of where he disappeared, apparently after descending into Spruce Canyon. The park doesn't even offer their own speculation as to what happened. And if Dale was inclined to walk north, why not walk north in Spruce Canyon? I mean, if you accidentally fall into a canyon, why not follow it back the way you came? He knew the Spruce Tree Terrace was back that way. If he was calling to people on the Petroglyph Trail, then he still had an idea where the trail was. So why not follow it back to Salvation? If Dale had walked north up Spruce Canyon, it would have taken him to a road in roughly 3 miles. But he really didn't have to do all that. If he had just walked a little ways up Spruce Canyon, he would have hit the Spruce Canyon Trail, which literally runs along the very bottom. I mean, there are people hiking there, people that could help him. He wouldn't be trapped down there. There was an easy way out. That means if he fell, he was less than a mile from an easily accessed trail that's in use throughout the day. Even if he didn't see people walking the Spruce Canyon Trail, the trail itself would have been obvious. He could have followed it in either direction and it would have taken him back to the Spruce Tree Terrace. If he was able to walk 4.2 miles as the crow flies, he must have still been in fairly good condition. So why didn't he try walking back the way he had come? Instead, he apparently did something else, or something else happened to him, and the Park Service has no interest in clarifying where he was found or what happened. It would have been so easy for them to simply name the canyon Dale was found in. Doing so would do nothing to harm or affect any of the things the Park Service listed in their statement. So to be clear, while it's odd in itself that Dale didn't try walking up Spruce Canyon, it would make the most sense that he traveled north and died. But that doesn't seem to fit very well with what the Park Service did say about where his remains were found. If he went south,
the journey back to a northeast sector of the park would seemingly be impossible because of the layout of the canyons. All of this adds up to a bit of a mystery. This explanation, while I do like it more than portals, is pretty unsatisfactory. And as for Thomas Irwin, we're over 6 months into his disappearance and still he hasn't been found. Obviously at this point he's no longer alive, but I do wonder if he ever is found, will it be in a remote area of the park similar to Dale? You'd think not, because he was quite a bit older and less fit. So we got 2 people disappearing from this same trail for unknown reasons. We got people who are wandering in off-limits areas of the park finding evidence and remains, and a body location that the park doesn't want to make public. And again, that doesn't make sense to me. That information is public record, and for years now they won't give it to me despite my attempts. Is something odd happening at Mesa Verde? I can't say for sure or not, but there's too many unanswered questions here for a case that's been closed for years with a body being found. Let's hope that we get some explanations in the future, because I'm going to keep digging on this case, and I'll be sure to release any updates as soon as I learn about them. So until next time, thanks for watching.